Well, hey everybody, welcome to another installment of our Let's Talk About series. And today as we get started, we want you just to take a moment just to think about the catchiest song that you can think of. And once you have that in your mind, you probably know what it's like to have that song stuck in your head. And so it goes without saying that a lot of times what happens is when we get a song stuck in our head, we find ourselves maybe suddenly just blurting out the words, or maybe we hum the melody, or maybe we even go so far as to start doing the dance that goes with the song. And all of a sudden we find ourselves wondering this kind of key question: where did that even come from? Now, don't worry. I'm not asking you to stop spending all of your free time watching YouTube videos or taking a break from social media. Although I think if we're honest, we could all probably use a little break from the endless scrolling that goes on and on. But instead, what we want to do today is we want to help you see the way that the content that you consume, in other words, the things you watch, you listen to, the things you engage with online, we want to show you how those things can impact your life. Because I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but the shows that you stream, the video games you play, the music that you listen to, the videos that you watch on YouTube, the things that you read about what's going on in the world, all the accounts that you follow on social media, all of that content that you consume has the potential to impact your words, your thoughts, your choices, and your responses. Now, sure, sometimes it isn't really a big deal. Like maybe when you're learning the latest dance on TikTok and that's repeating on your mind, or maybe a hilarious quote that you can spit out from your favorite show, or maybe the cheat codes that you've memorized to your favorite video games, or the song lyrics that you can't get out of your head. Those things don't really tend to have a negative impact. But other times, some of the things that we consume has a way of impacting us more than we know. And that's why I want to spend some time together talking about the content that we take in, specifically when it comes to the topic of violence. Now, let me explain. Whether you realize it or not, media today is filled with violent images. And I'm sure even just hearing the word violence probably brings some examples to your mind. Maybe it's song lyrics that talk about hurting other people, or full-on war or conflict scenes that we've seen from shows or movies, and everything in between. And on so many apps and so many channels, so many songs and shows, violence is just there. And if we're being honest, we don't always notice it right away, do we? We take in some forms of violence and we don't even flinch. And that's because in our world today, violence is almost too normal. It's just a central part of how our world works. And so let's think about how this plays out. Let's say you're watching a show with fighting or violence or death, and eventually you stop turning away even when the worst scenes are taking place. Maybe, for example, you listen to songs with violent lyrics, that when you hear those same words repeated in the hallways at school, you don't even raise your head or acknowledge it. Or maybe when you play that intense video game all weekend, you find yourself being unexpectedly harsh or aggressive towards your sibling or towards your parent the next day. And I don't know about you, but that's not the type of person that I want to be, and that's not the type of person that I want you to be. I don't want to be the type of person that isn't affected when I see things like pain or heartbreak or death or hate. I don't want to be somebody who changes because of the violence that I've watched or seen. I don't want to be somebody who just thinks violence is a normal way of life. But here's the thing, since violence is unfortunately a part of the world that we live in today, we have to figure out how do we deal with that. And that's why we're talking about this topic, is because what I think that we'll discover together is that instead of focusing our conversation all about violence like we've been doing, what we're really going to be talking about is the idea of peace. You see, violence isn't a new thing. Violence has been a constant part of culture for everybody for thousands and thousands of years. Even if you go all the way back to the Old Testament and the New Testament, the writers were in cultures that were filled with violence. And while there are all kinds of real life accounts of war and death and battles and executions that we can read about in Scripture, I want to focus on something that will help us navigate the violent things that we're exposed to and how we can pursue peace in the face of them. In other words, I want us to look to Jesus. And you may say, okay, that's the typical church answer. But hear me out. Because during Jesus' life and ministry, he clearly stated how he wanted his followers to think about and to interact with violence in the world around them. And a lot of these statements that Jesus made around this topic, they come from a message that we've titled the Sermon on the Mount. And this is a message that Jesus shared with his followers where he spoke to them about how God calls us to live. And he kicks off the message in kind of a unique way because he gives the audience, he gives us a list of people that he calls blessed. Now, you and I probably have some ideas about what it means to be blessed, right? Like we say, well, okay, if you have a nice house or lots of money or all the things you want or your crush or your love interest, likes you back, all those things are probably on that list. And here's the thing, is the people that Jesus was teaching, their list may have looked different than ours today, but the people listening to Jesus on that day, they probably had an idea of what they would consider somebody who is blessed meaning. And that's what makes what Jesus actually said so unexpected. Because he didn't list off a bunch of material things that we might want. Instead, he listed off a bunch of things that we can be. So let's take a look at just one. Because in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, he says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Now here's the thing. The word in this passage that's used, blessed, it literally means a deep sense of happiness or fulfillment. That's what the word literally means. So Jesus was saying, if you're choosing to be a peacemaker, that means you can have a deep sense of happiness and fulfillment. Or you could say it this way, that to be a peacemaker is to be a person who brings and creates peace in any and all circumstances. Now, it's really important for us to remember that Jesus said this statement to people who hadn't lived in peace for a really long time. Their land had been conquered. They were ruled by the Roman Empire. And the Romans, you may recall, they used violence as a way to threaten and control these people. And so the people listening to Jesus teach this, they were hurting, they were suffering, and they were probably pretty angry. They were living in the middle of violence, and they were dealing with a lack of peace that wasn't their fault. And so when Jesus tells them, hey, you'll be blessed if you're a peacemaker, they probably thought, Jesus, that sounds great, but how can we possibly choose to be peacemakers when we're literally surrounded by so much violence? And if we're honest, that's probably a question that you and I should ask today as well. Is how is it possible to be a peacemaker when our siblings are annoying us, or when the adults in our house are constantly fighting? Or how can we pursue peace when everyone else is into this violent video game or watching a violent show? And how can we create peace when tragedy is happening in our community and people are experiencing violence in another country? Well, that is where I think what Jesus said is so powerful and real. Because if you think about it, violence tends to lead to more violence. Or violence only leads to more violence. In other words, repaying evil with evil, it just becomes a vicious cycle. And Jesus knew that, hey, if you want to find a deep fulfillment in the midst of the chaos of your lives around you, the answer is to choose peace. You see, Jesus knew that the most powerful way to change things is through peace. The most powerful way to change things is through peace. In other words, it's in choosing to become a peacemaker that both ourselves and others can see a better world. And then Jesus tells us that if we do that, we'll be called children of God. In other words, that means the way that we live will show what God is really like to other people. But how do we actually do this? How can we become peacemakers in a culture where violence is just everywhere? Well, to help us out with this, we're going to look at another part of the New Testament, which is something that the Apostle Paul wrote. Now, Paul, we know, is credited with writing roughly about half of the New Testament. And he writes a letter to a group of people in a place called Philippi. And in it, he encourages the Philippians, who, like you and me, were living in a violent culture. And he encourages them to do something that I think can help us move towards being a peacemaker. So here's what Paul says. He says, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable, and right and pure, and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Now here's the thing. Paul didn't throw shade on the violence that they were seeing happening all around them. Instead, Paul encourages them to fix their thoughts. To fix their thoughts. In other words, the key to becoming a peacemaker is focusing your attention on things that are going to bring peace to your heart. It's fixing those thoughts, those things that go through our head every single day. Zooming in on things that are true, that are honorable, that are right, that are pure, that are lovely, that are admirable, that are excellent, and that are worthy of praise. You see, you'll most likely never be able to eliminate all the violent imagery around you, but you can really zoom in and focus on things that bring peace to your own heart. Because remember, being a peacemaker starts with peace in your own heart. Being a peacemaker starts with peace in your own heart. You see, Jesus knew that the people that were surrounding him, they were also surrounded by violence, and it was impacting them even if they didn't realize it. You see, Jesus knew that they needed something to help them see the world more clearly. So while they may have not been able to stop the war or violent bullying or imprisonment around them, they could move through the world with peace in their hearts. And you and I can do the same thing. But we have to focus on peace. Because remember, being a peacemaker starts with peace in your own heart. And so to pursue peace in a world that's used to violence, we have to start with ourselves, with our own hearts. And we have to do what the Apostle Paul tells us, and what he told the church at Philippi, is to be focused on things that are true and honorable, things that are right and pure, lovely and admirable, things that are excellent and worthy of praise. We have to practice doing these things and seeing things in the world around us so that we can actually see things through this filter. And how do we do this? Well, there are a few things. The first is to see violence for what it is. In other words, get honest with yourself about the content that you engage with regularly. The stuff you listen to, the video games you play, the accounts that you follow, the music on your playlist, the conversations that you have, the stories that you see on your social media feed. Don't just shrug it off and say, well, it's no big deal. Instead, ask God to show you what you may not be seeing clearly in it, and let it challenge you to be a peacemaker. And then second, after you've spent time seeing violence for what it is, pay attention to the impact. Pay attention to the impact. Notice the way that the violence may be consuming you or may be impacting your thoughts and your words and your choices and reactions. Pay attention to the way that your mood changes when you play a certain video game, or when you react to a tragedy, or the feelings that you have after you listen to a certain song, or the way you treat people after you've been online for several hours. And if you're not really sure how to do that, would you be brave enough to ask somebody close to you to pay attention to the impact that these things have on you? And if something is impacting you more than you realize, then maybe it's a sign that you need to step back from it for a while. And you need to choose not to engage in it, because it's not bringing you peace. And then third is focus on peace. If being a peacemaker starts with finding peace in your own heart, then it's important to fill your heart up with things that actually bring you peace. And so as you begin to notice the way that violence may be impacting you, maybe you need to shift your focus away from the things that are causing a negative impact and put it onto things that will help you find peace. So let's go back to Paul's letter and let's look at what he said, because what I read you was just a portion of it. He says, fix your thoughts on what is true and honorable and right and pure and lovely and admirable. Think about things that are excellent and worthy of praise. Then the God of peace will be with you. You see, this is our filter. And if we're not sure that what we're focusing on is promoting peace, then we need to think back to Paul's words for guidance. In other words, is the song I'm listening to respectful? Does it make me feel good? Is my response to violence in the world pure and admirable? Am I treating others after streaming this particular show? Am I treating them in ways that are kind? Are my words and thoughts true? Because remember, being a peacemaker starts with peace in your own heart. It starts with us. And if we become people who pay attention to peace and we see violence for what it really is, we'll be moving in the right direction. And if we let Jesus help us choose peace over anything else, then eventually we'll see change, not just in ourselves, but in the world around us. And we'll join a long line of people who chose peace when the world around them didn't. And in fact, those people who chose peace when the world around them was choosing violence and chaos actually changed the course of history. And that's what peace can do. Now here's the thing, I know this isn't easy, but I do promise you that it can happen. And it's gonna require us to get honest with ourselves and to consider maybe, hey, we need to change the way we think about the things that we watch or listen to or read or play online. And a first step for us may be to have a conversation with a trusted adult. Remember, we talk about this all the time, that when we gather in person, we have small groups, because your small groups are places to find support and encouragement and challenge to do the big things that God calls us to do, like choosing peace. And if you're not here with us in person, I encourage you to find a trusted adult to have that conversation with. So as we wrap this up today, I want you to think about this question. What does being a peacemaker mean to you? What does being a peacemaker mean to you? Well, thank you so much for checking out the first installment of our, or this other installment rather, of our Let's Talk About series. Now, as you may know, each week that we have kind of a standalone message, we do something in this series and we talk about a particular topic. Today, as we looked at the topic of violence and peace, we hope that it's been beneficial and helpful to you as we think about the things that we're taking in, the things that we watch and listen to and read and interact with, and the conversations we have and the video games we play and all of that. And our hope is that you'll start to realize, hey, maybe some of the stuff that I'm taking in, the violence and the negative imagery, that may not be too dissimilar from the things that we read about in Scripture, maybe we need to make some adjustments. And maybe we need to focus more on peace and more on the love of God. And so I would encourage you to find ways this week. Maybe there's some of the practical things that we talked about in this video about finding peace. And I would encourage you to search for those things and to pursue those things. Now, just a quick reminder, we do meet on Sunday nights from 6 to 8 p.m. in the youth room here at New Hope Church. We'd love to have you join us in person as we continue this discussion and we talk about a variety of other topics that are relevant for your world today. But know that we love you, we care about you, we want to support you and encourage you however we can. So we hope that you reach out and that you have conversation with a trusted adult, with one of us. We'd love to talk to you. But most importantly, remember that God loves you and He desires for you to have peace. And being a peacemaker starts with the peace in your heart. Have a great and wonderful rest of your day and an amazing week, and we hope to see you soon.